Hi there, folks. James Penca here, Creative Director of Titanic Honor and Glory, Titanic Project 401. But we're not here to talk about those projects. We're here to talk about a much more important project to myself, to many of you watching. I'm sure we'll dive into all of that. But recently we held a little Let's Play where myself and one of the other developers on our team played through a little game you may know called Titanic Adventure Out of Time. For many of you watching, for myself, Titanic Adventure Out of Time was quite formative, and we'll talk more about that. But it also, in one way or another, inspired Titanic Honor and Glory and all the stuff that we do at Vintage Digital Revival. So very important game to us. So we were playing through the other day, and then a friend of the project, fan of the project, Phil Madafferi, reached out and wanted to set up a little phone call for us. And so Phil is going to join us in a second. In fact, let's bring Phil in here. Say hi, Phil.
Greetings.
All right.
Everyone's going all right?
Yeah. Hope you're doing well. Thanks for doing this for us, getting us in touch with our other guest for the day. Folks, I will welcome to my screen here the writer and producer of the one and only Titanic Adventure Out of Time, Mr. Andrew Nelson. Hi, Andrew. How are you?
Hey there. Good to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yes, this is the part where we pretend like we weren't speaking for the last 15 minutes about this. That's my favorite part of every interview. You always got to pretend like, oh, how are you? So Andrew, it is a pleasure to speak to you. This is the first time we've ever spoken, and I've always wanted to get in touch at various points, being that, Titanic Adventure Out of Time really was an important project for me in my life. But also now, creative directing Titanic Honor and Glory. It would just be good to chat. And so I'm very, very happy to chat with you. So me and Phil have some questions for you.
Okay.
And we can just go off the rails and we'll talk for about the next hour or so. And but thanks for joining us. Really, really nice to meet you.
Well, it's my pleasure. I know that so many people have loved Titanic Adventure Out of Time for a very long time. And I also meet people who, when they find out I did that, said, yeah, I had that game growing up, or we played it in our family, or, I couldn't get the music out of my head. And what was Penny Pringle doing with their hat on all the time?
Yeah. I mean, my siblings and I on almost a weekly basis, my sister or my brother, some joke from Adventure Out of Time, something that we remember as kids, like really sticks in our brains. And I mean, people probably saw this in the back. I know you did. Yeah. I always have a copy. Yeah. You never know when you need to look something up.
Exactly. I remember when I gave the person who wrote that all my notes.
Oh, great.
I think they're a bit intimidated. Well, I was explaining to you, I am teaching a class in placemaking and storytelling here at the College of Charleston for the academic year. So for people who don't know what I have been doing since I wrote and created Titanic Adventure Out of Time, I have been involved, as I was before I was working there, in media. So I'm a writer for National Geographic Travel, for the Wall Street Journal, and have just published a book last week. And I'm excited to share that, if I may. Can I do a shameless plug?
Oh, no, I actually had it on my list. There we go.
You're not there, but it's backwards, of course, because we're nerd.
Maybe I can flip it later.
It's a collection of non-traditional travel destinations that, with my years at National Geographic, I've traveled a great deal. So
that's great. Yeah, I literally had it on my list. If there was anything you wanted to promote, Phil mentioned the book, so
yeah. Well, we got the shameless part out of the way.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
Wants to talk about the Titanic.
Yes,
and that I think is why we're here. So,
sure. Let's dive in.
Fire away with your questions.
Yeah. Well, my first question for you, just to start at the beginning, what was your relationship to Titanic before Adventure Out of Time, before Cyberflix? Did you have a Titanic background, any interest before?
as a kid, maybe I was 12, I read Walter Lord's A Night to Remember, and also saw the British movie, which was done in the early 60s, late 50s, A Night to Remember, based on the book, which is kind of interesting because, you know, there were still survivors around at that point that they could, you know, check and verify authenticity. I know now, compared to what Cameron did, it looks very antique, but the power is still there. So if you watch either movie, the power is still there. So it had a big impact on me. I remember doing a project when I was a kid for class about icebergs and the Titanic. And so, but then, you know, life intervenes and you grow up and you're doing all this stuff until I was visiting my brother and sister-in-law in New York. And this was right about 95 when CDs were all the rage, right? CD-ROMs were the way that we could deliver, you know, a graphic tour de force with art. Mist had just broken and everybody, you know, was in awe of the graphics and the mood that it could create. And my sister-in-law, Debbie, was saying, I love this, but I have 2 little kids. I can't play this game for so long. Can't you make a game like a movie that has a beginning, middle, and an end?
Right.
And I got it. So on the flight back to Knoxville, where I was one of the founders of Cyberflix, who created Adventure Out of Time. I saw there was a story in Newsweek or Time or something about the syncing and, you know, debating how long it took to sync. Was it really 2.5 hours? And I thought, aha, why not? There is a problem that has a solution to it. Why not do an adventure game where you have limitless time to explore and to poke around and to talk to characters. But once you grab all of the artifacts that you need to, it triggers the iceberg sinking. And then you have the same amount of time that the actual survivors did of finding your way off and into a boat, or you're going down with a ship.
A genius idea, if I may say so. It's funny you mentioned Walter Lord's A Night to Remember, because for pretty much every generation, but particularly an older generation, Walter, you know, A Night to Remember is the number one thing that everyone says. That's what got me into Titanic, was A Night to Remember, or the film. I would argue, certainly for my generation, but possibly it might be the first bit of media, books, TV, whatever. I would say Adventure Out of Time is A Night to Remember for us. You know,
I'm so honored to hear that.
I know. I hope that you'd like that. The thing I hear from people my age and older is Adventure Out of Time is the reason that Titanic entered their life. And the only other thing I can think of that has that amount of frequency is Walter Lord's A Night to Remember.
Well, I actually met him in doing the interviews.
Really?
I went to his apartment in the Upper East Side of New York, and he was quite old by then. And we had a long afternoon. He showed me all of his memorabilia, including, there was one survivor. She was a fashion writer. I think she was a writer, and I've forgotten her name, but she got in to a lifeboat with her lucky pig, and he had the lucky pig.
Right, of course.
He spoke so movingly about it, and it did such a great narrative job of telling the story, reporting it and structuring it. So I think most of the films since then have borrowed from the structure of his book, including James Cameron, you know, with sort of the cutaways up to the bridge and on deck, you know, and and if you have an unlimited amount of money, like James Cameron, you can make it all come to life in Mexico. So
absolutely.
I enjoyed when the movie first came out. I'll tell you, I remember that I was in San Francisco, and I went to the theater. It was one of those great big, you know, don't make theaters like that anymore, with big plush seats and huge screen. And I sat there through 2.5 showings till I couldn't take it anymore.
Wow.
Because it was just such a pleasure to be involved with somebody else's Titanic rather than my own.
Right.
You know, to be able, and I think as you're designing your own, was it Titanic Honor and Glory?
Mm-hmm.
As you're designing H&G, I think that you too have the Titanic's blueprints in your head. So you could walk around, you would have no problem getting lost there. You can find your way. You know where everything is on A deck and B deck and Scotland Road and all of those things. Yeah, so it was quite a pleasure to see it. And of course, I always tell my students, one of the seminal or most important reasons that we should think about Cameron's Titanic is because it was the first time anybody ever used CGI in film to make people cry. Before that, it was always about, you know, there's space operas or science fiction, Star Wars. But this was the first time you could, you know, the graphics had gotten great enough. You could recreate that whole liner. You could sync it. And it was such an impactful, moving piece of filmmaking. And of course, but I always wondered why Leonardo DiCaprio, why Jack didn't get on that door. It seemed there was enough room in Rose.
The famous door, as our community will be the first to tell you, it's not a door. But everyone always calls it a door. It's actually a panel from the lounge above the door. But it looks like a door, so it's fine. Phil, do you have a question for?
Yes. I've played the game from obviously a kid. Was there ever the option to think about maybe possibly having an alternative ending where you could actually save the Titanic from sinking?
We actually considered that, discussed it, and abandoned the idea because the impact and the power of the Titanic was that it sank. Had they not collided with that iceberg, nobody would even remember the ship, except for some, you know, some ocean liner buffs. You know, it had a service very much like the Britannic or the Olympic. We did a lot of breakthroughs that, you know, to this day seem ridiculously easy, but we were the first people, for example, to record in. We know these BBC newscasters, and they got in the studio, and one of them, and gosh, I know her, I've got her name written down. She was Penny Pringle. So she would record her dialogue, and then we would send it by email in packets. Wow. And you know, nobody was thinking like this. You know, it was kind of interesting that, and because we were all young, we said, well, why not just do it?
Yeah.
What the heck? So I mean, nobody said no. The entire time we were doing this, nobody said no to us.
Right. I'm curious if you could go into. I mean, you could explain a little bit about, you know, like you're credited in the project as writer and producer, to talk a bit about what exactly you would have done, and also I'd love to hear where, as the writer of this project, like you were the only writer of the project, correct? Like
correct,
it's all you, which is
it was all
like
me. Same thing, but yes.
Yeah, I you know, I write. I'm not too good, I don't think, but you know, I write. I can't imagine doing that whole project on my own. So I'd love to hear like what you did aside from writing as well. But where did this story come from?
I did the Highline production. Oh, you mean the story itself? Well, I think one of the things that we looked at is that you had, you know, the technology was helping shape the story or limiting it, which was great, right? Because you need limits whenever you're doing that, and what was considered feasible. So our engine called DreamWorks, which was developed by Bill Appleton, who is the head of Cyberflix, was very good at interiors and what we would call the characters, which were puppets. So he actually had the you could actually see that you could code the way they were talking with their lips and emotions, and that was all triggered and connected with the dialogue. So you're basically the animators were taking my dialogue and animating those people. So we had we had, I think, half of the Oak Ridge amateur theater players come in, and when I say amateur, they're not. They were
They are
actually
not. They are
Well,
very good actors.
yeah. So, but the animation wasn't really them. They were taking, and we were doing, it's almost stop action, right? So they would do a pose and look surprised, look angry, and, you know, raise your eyebrow, raise your left eyebrow, raise your right eyebrow, and, you know, say your different vowels, and we would capture it digitally, and then they would deconstruct it and put it in Dream Factory so you could pull on that, and then that's where you created these actors. So, you know, it was rough, but yet at the same time it created this this canvas, I guess you would call it, or a mood. Like the thing that would astound us was, you know, once we got the engine up and running and they created, you know, one of the great things about a passenger ship is that it is all, you know, straight lines, right and left angles. So it's perfect for something like this.
That's very true.
Well, and I, you know, I had to do a sales job because I think people were a little doubtful because nobody had ever done or taken something that was, you know, it was basically, you know, action or shooters, right? And they had never taken that and created something totally different. And I just said, look, think of it. The Titanic is a spaceship in the void of the ocean, the void of space. So you can't leave it because you'll die, right? Because it was a cold night. So basically what you have is a, you know, an Edwardian spaceship, and all of those characters are all passengers on it. And so that's how that's how I sold it. And, you know, to everybody's credit, I think, you know, we went with it. So, you know, we didn't have a lot of money. So,
well, you guys were very smart, you know, and I didn't think of these things as when I was a kid, of course, but, you know, having the game set right before the iceberg collision. So as Smethel says, there won't be many people out. Let's you have an empty ship,
well,
you know.
You caught all our clues, right? Why? Well, and that was the other thing, that it was haunted and eerie, and it was very much like The Shining. You know, all we needed were the twins, right?
Yeah, right.
But,
well, you certainly had the music. Those are the things I would say.
Scott Scheinbaum and Eric Holt did just such an amazing job on that music. So incredibly talented, and it really, you know, we would do it. I mean, I would be there late at night doing some sort of check on something, characters or dialogue, and, you know, you would go in and, you know, sort of roaming the halls, waiting to, you know, trigger an encounter with so and so and so and so, and you just get, you know, goosebumps.
Yeah,
because it was just creepy. We were in a 2-story loft in downtown Knoxville, Tennessee, of all places. But it was really kind of creepy, you know, walking around, and you could hear that mood in the mournfulness of the music, and it was almost an adagio. So you had that real sense, and I think all of these layers, because the talent of the team that created this, and we were working with an outfit in Salt Lake City who had gotten Defense Department funding to do 3D modeling. So they were branching off and creating entire categories of, you know, like basically doing stock furniture, you know. So they looked at Titanic as a great way for them to sort of fill out a lot of things. So we had a lot of help with that. It was a fascinating time and you know, I don't think, knowing what we knew, that we would ever do that again. You know, it was just so much work. But, you know, I think you could see that there was so much creativity went into it. Paul Haskins, we had one guy whose grandfather worked at Harlan and Wolff in the shipyards. He didn't build the Titanic, but he worked there. So we're just basically, you know, building the Titanic again in digital dry dock.
Right.
So,
which is literally what we're doing now. So
yeah,
the journey continues.
Yeah. So, and again, I think that's sort of the the Titanic is an endless canvas that you can project anything on. We, strove for accuracy. We tried, there's, I think, how many different, it was a matrix of endings. So there are at least, I'll have to look at my notes. I still have the complete screenplay, as it were.
Oh, wow. That would be fun to see. Yeah, I on everything you just said, I think one of the biggest accomplishments of the project was the mood, the music, with your writing, with the story, with the environments. Like a perfect example is like talking to Zeidel in the reception room. You have the creepiest music in the game in a very dimly lit room that I was scared to go into as a kid. And you're talking to to the bad guy, and he's telling you things like, don't look around too much. Like you'll get curiosity killed the cat. Yes, like stuff like that. So anyway, Phil, take it away. Ask another question.
Yeah, saying about the screenplay, you've probably got pages and pages of dialogue. What would have to be your probably number one line from the actual dialogue itself?
The number one line,
or a favorite character that you just like.
Well, I mean, Smethels, of course.
Oh, good.
Mean, he is such a jerk. And his little digs at everybody else, I think, is really great. And let's see, who else? And Penny Pringle, of course. And Carlson. Carlson, he really is you, right? So you're playing Carlson. I mean, he never had a line, but everybody's reacting to him, and it was really very it was all good fun. There were some that were really fun to write. Now, the other thing you guys should know, and you probably figured that out, was that a lot of that epistolary dialogue was factual and actually based on real people. The characters were all made up, like Mrs. Cashmore, but we had always thought that this could also have an educational component. Of course, you have a tour of it, and we thought even from a marketing idea, wouldn't it be great for kids to just like run around the Titanic? Now, of course, we'd really thought and really hard. The kids are going to do it anyway because they love the game, right?
Right.
So you got some education in there. I think that's what Mrs. Cashmore was, talking about, all the biography of the passengers. But we thought, how would you do that? But you probably have one of those ladies who's a gossip who knows the history of everybody. So let's make that. We made that into Mrs. Cashmore.
That's pretty perfect.
I thought that would be the best way to do it. And then, of course, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Dust, A Tale of the Wild West, which was our Western.
Of course.
Okay, so we have one character that is in both of those.
Buick Riviera. Yeah, I never played Dust, but
Buick's there.
Yeah,
and his terrible French.
The copy of Adventure at a Time that I had as a kid, I don't know how many were this way. In the folders, you could click through and you could see a trailer for Dust.
Right.
And so I watched that trailer like hundreds of times.
Oh,
but
really?
Like I don't know. My parents were very like, you have a video game, you don't need another.
Get outside, get some fresh air.
Exactly. Right. So I could never get Dust. Speaking of the script and all that, I'm curious. One of the things that I loved doing growing up was I'd play through Adventure at a Time. I've played that game thousands of times, like through. I would try to figure out the mechanics behind how it would work. How many conversations can I have before I have a conversation that advances the interior mechanism of the game,
right. No, I understand.
So what if you broke the game into chapters, for example, like what triggers the next chapter? So I'm curious how you went about figuring out, because it is complicated. I mean, there are multiple ways to accomplish the same goal. There are multiple characters to talk to at this point. And even today, I'll still be playing. It's rare now because I've played it so much, but pretty recently, I was walking around at a certain point in the game and had no idea that I could talk to Max Seidelman in this room at this point. I've never seen him there before. So how did you?
Oh, good old Max. I like Max.
Oh, he might be my favorite. Probably, yeah.
Well, he was that actor who played him was very expressive and with those pop eyes and
yeah.
yeah.
But how did you come about? Like,
So
it's so complicated.
Bill's team did a lot of the gameplay. So as they were going through and testing, there's an obvious need to create a chapter or create a stop point. So the basic strategy is that you acquire, and I forgot how many of those items you needed to trigger
4.
Yeah, and whatever, there's a combination. There was a matrix with that too. I mean, there's a chart somewhere. So much of it was thrown out, like everything, of course. So that's basically how we did it. We reverse, engineered it. So then we needed to create a situation. So I would add additional dialogue and we'd have people come back in and do it. So, and Bill was just such a master programmer that he could just sort of get things in shape. And, then it was constantly refining it. So it was like, again, if you would imagine, building it, you've got the skeleton, and then you put the exoskeleton on top of that. And then, it's a lot of then playing to make sure that things work. I happen to think that there's stuff in there that nobody else has ever seen. So there are, because you asked me this question, and I know that there are Easter eggs in that. Guy by the name of Jay Nevins, who is in Chattanooga, I think Jay is now, but he would know because they put in so many fun Easter eggs. So
I'm sure there's stuff that,
well,
I'm sure there's stuff I've not seen, but
so at the end of the with the credits with all the flotsam and jetsam and the bodies floating in there, one of those was me.
Oh.
Guy in the tuxedo. So, wow. I mean, it was just it was this sort of tour de force, and I think it really became a very special project. I think I kind of don't think we knew exactly what we had until we knew we had something, because with Scott and Eric's music and all of these things going on, we just thought, wow. So
that's great.
Great, yeah.
Phil, you are up.
Okay. Yeah, given its great success when it first came out, did you ever think about doing possibly a sequel to it?
No.
There is a script or an outline, a treatment, I would tell you, that takes place after World War I. I can't tell you anything more about that, but Penny Pringle's in it.
Oh my gosh, Andrew.
Yeah.
Oh no. I mean, I assume it's something that, like, well, the company is no more, so that
right
will never see the light of day.
Obvious reasons for it, but it was well, I guess I could say. I mean, it took place during the Russian Revolution.
Okay, very cool.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, if that project, I unless you plan on using that story for something else, boy, would we love to see. I mean, just to that might
we can talk. Maybe there'll be I can't, just with copyright issues.
Of course.
Yeah. I can't really do that, but there's so many other things that one can do.
Yeah. Okay.
You just have to think of it in that sense. I mean, again, there's endless blank slates that we can always reinterpret, and that's what we always do, don't we? Each generation has to have their own Titanic. I'm waiting for the next one. It's probably yours.
I really hope so. I mean, we're doing our best. We're going down that. It's sort of going down more of an educational route. I prefer.
I get it. Yeah, I totally understand it. It's
than a full project, a full video game with a storyline and all that. We have a demo on our website. It has 50% of the ship, including, I think, every single space that was in Adventure Out of Time, including cabin C-73. We made sure C-73 is in there, and I should send you a picture. There's a trunk in there with it's literally like we made a little trunk. So it's a little shout out to Adventure Out of Time. There's a bunch of Easter eggs. In fact, I think if you go to the restaurant on the ship and look at the dinner menu, the reservations list,
Titanic Out of Time.
Or sorry. In our project, Yeah, if you go to the restaurant and look at the reservations list, there's characters from Adventure Out of Time in the waiting for dinner, you know, stuff like that. So we like to throw little
Well, of
shout outs.
course. I
Yeah.
mean, it's always that way, right? So,
Yeah. Well, that's
it's
cool to know that there is a future to Adventure Out of Time, even though even though may never get to see it. It's nice to know that there was plans for more, because
yeah,
you guys
Brent
certainly
Charlton back again, the poor guy.
yeah yeah, that's pretty great. Love that.
Well, everybody thinks he's a sort of a schlemiel or something. And I don't. I mean, I always thought, of course, he's the cipher and around which everything pivots. But the idea that we talked to about, which was, how do you know that this isn't all really a dream, and that when the World War II bomb dropped in London, he wasn't just, these were his last, seconds imagining all of what could have gone better in his life. So, I mean, we deliberately made that sort of vague because we wanted people to sort of think whatever they wanted to think about that. And it's amazing. Other people, I've from over the years, people have written me and offered various explanations for Frank or what else could have happened. And I mean, saving it, Phil, as you had said, that is always a perennial question. Can you save the Titanic? And my answer to that is yes, but if you did, then there'd be no Titanic. The tragedy is what we think about, and it's interesting. The Titanic always seems to resurface as a metaphor or story, fable, whenever we have tension or feel uneasy about technology. Remember, the internet was just exploding when Titanic Adventure Out of Time was coming. But just zipping back and forth with conversation in London, it was like unheard of. So now with AI and people worried about that, who knows?
What a time to be talking about Titanic again.
Well, it's again, it teaches us the lesson: don't rely too much on tech.
Yeah,
that will let you down.
Yeah. Speaking of that, it's this book that I showed earlier, the strategy guide. I needed that book because as a kid, the script you wrote. I mean, I was 6 when I played this for the first time. I could not get past. I could get the wireless room message that I needed to code. That was it. But just a credit to your project, it was so enthralling. I didn't get past the decoding of that wireless message until I was maybe 10 or 11. I played that game for years until I finally got the book. Again, my parents, they were like, you don't need a book. You have a video game. I need the strategy guide to play the video game. Anyway, I won't get mad at my parents on camera, but I needed the book because it was so complicated. Of course, as an adult, I was probably just pressing the wrong buttons. I just didn't know what I was doing, but I still was so enthralled by the game. And it was still discovering new things. I even, and it's on camera too, when we played we did a Let's Play of Adventure at a Time last month-ish or a couple weeks ago. And I was playing with my fellow developer. His name is Jack. He's a younger guy. He's around 20 or younger. And he had never played the game before. Big Titanic fan, but he had never played it. So I sort of was seeing the game through his eyes.
What did he think? That's curious. I'm curious.
Oh, he was like loving it. He was loving the drama of Georgia and all that stuff. So he always would make me click on the most dramatic responses to like really poke these the characters. But in the process of doing this, I made a new discovery about the game that I had never noticed before. So in the opening, in the London flat, there's a ticket for the Hindenburg. And that's a great reference. And I always thought maybe the Hindenburg is the sequel because it's just a great.
Well, we were thinking maybe.
It's very, I don't know, Hindenburg and Titanic, they're very similar. So so there's a Hindenburg ticket, and of course, as a kid, I have no idea what that means. as I got older, I understood what the Hindenburg was, but for some reason, I just always assumed that that's a ticket he's going to go on the Hindenburg. Like it hasn't happened yet. Right. And I've never processed that, of course, the way the timeline doesn't work out that way. But as we're playing, I'm looking at the ticket and it has a burnt edge to it. And I literally was like, this game never stops blowing my mind. It never stops. Like to see the little singed edge because he was on the Hindenburg, but he survived. And the ticket got burnt a little bit. Genius.
Right, which is implying even more, right? So
absolutely genius. Yeah.
Yeah. Frank keeps it going endlessly. Yeah.
Yeah, the game is just filled with little clues, little fun things that have nothing to do with the story necessarily, but they and that just goes to show what a good video game can have in it.
Well, and I think one of the things that we were really conscious of was that we were in the silent movie phase of video game production. That we did not have perfect technology. We could not do everything we wanted. So, for example, one of the reasons why there was so much dialogue, of course, because that was serving in the place of action. So I think because you couldn't show it, and if you could show it, it wasn't going to be. It took so much rendering time and animation and man hours to create things like fights or anything like that. It was we had to put all of that into the syncing, right? So a lot of that is talking about action that's happened, and of course, the sort of the communicators there, like Penny, Smethels, who else? We never did see Captain Smith, did we? It was, we had
Officer Morrow. That's
Officer Morrow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, he represented, but again, we had to sort of keep, each group, and then the who were the sort of the dingbat,
the couple,
the Gorse Joneses.
Joneses, yeah.
That was just pure fun for Brits. I lived in London for a while too, so I knew it and knew a lot of people that had similar affectations, let's say. But,
yeah, there's some highlights in the script. Phil, I don't know if you have some favorites. One of mine is colder than a cast iron commode out here. That's a classic. I mean, something I think about on a not a daily basis, but a weekly basis at least. I used to work on cruise ships. So I'd be out on deck at night, and I'd take a deep breath, and I would turn to whoever I was with, and I would say, the sea air really clears out the sinuses. I would say things like that, and they'd go, "What?" I'm like, it's from a thing. Don't worry about it.
It's from a video game.
Yeah. Phil, do you have another question? We've got time for a couple more.
Yeah. So one of the burning questions that I've always wondered as well is like, you've got the voice of Third Officer Morrow, but then you've also got the voice of Carlson. They sound very, very much alike. Is that the same voice actor or not?
I am probably going to say that's a good question, and I don't remember that.
Do you? When's the last time you've played Adventure Out of Time? Has it?
Oh my gosh, I haven't played it in years. I mean, whenever I want to get my fix, of course, you have on YouTube, there are just hours of it streaming.
Right.
So, I would love it if it was updated and turned into something online that people could play. I'm sure.
Well, it is there
now, but what?
Yeah, there's a website, Steam, which has it's sort of like iTunes for video games. You could kind of think of it that way. They have it.
They have Titanic.
Yeah, they do. It's been up for only a year or two. For the longest time, though, you couldn't play it. Like, you had to find a version online that didn't really work that well. It was like it was. If I remember correctly, you could play it, but the screen was like this big on your computer. It's like a tiny little. So they figured it out. I don't know how, but you can play it now.
That's amazing. I mean, some of the stuff I donated to the video game project out in the Bay Area, and then I was also contacted by the Library of Congress. So I donated stuff to the Library of Congress too. So because I think it's important that people have these games.
Oh yeah.
preserved and saved. We see what happens with silent film. I mean, you know, it's the same sort of thing. But you know, all I can say was a marvelous. I always say it was the best experience ever of my career. Was being, you know, it worked.
Oh,
I think
great.
I didn't have a weekend for like 48 weeks. You know, I mean,
Right.
really, we worked on it, and I think it was, you know, it was a real labor of love too.
That's great.
Everybody who worked on it gave it their all.
And it really shows, and it's partly why, like you say, with the silent film stuff, you know, there are a lot of games from my childhood that I don't like. I've tried to find, you know,
Yeah.
that I've looked up the literal title of the project,
Mhm.
and it won't come up. And but
Things
yours,
vanish. We think everything's online now.
yeah.
Yeah.
No, your project has certainly lived on. It's
Well,
pretty
that's
iconic.
good to know. I mean, the biggest pleasure that I take is listening to you guys talk about how influential it was when you were growing up. And, you know, to say that it was like the Walter Lord, the night to remember for your generation.
Right.
I think, you know, I couldn't be happier. That makes me feel great. As you know, I'm a professor as well. So, and it's really interesting, you know, my pupils were all born after 9/11. So to that
Right.
in history, and I'll tell you a little story if we have some time.
Oh yeah, go for it.
So I was working in San Francisco for Britannica.com, Encyclopedia Britannica, who refused to do an open source encyclopedia. So Wikipedia beat them to it, and we know what happened. At any rate, so they laid us all off. And on September 10th, 2001, I took a plane to New York and was staying in Lower Manhattan when the Twin Towers were attacked. So I saw it all, saw the, you know, help people,
Wow.
I mean, all of that, felt the flame on my face, you know, the heat from the fireball on my face.
Wow.
But when I was in the middle of the street and the tower closest to me, the North Tower, began to peel apart, it's sort of, the top sort of began like skin sloughing off. Just sort of began. And all I could think of, I'm sitting there in the middle of the street, people are screaming and are just watching like me dumbfounded. And I just thought, this sounds exactly like the reports in the congressional hearings after the Titanic disaster, where the survivors are saying, we were sitting in the lifeboats, we were watching this thing happen, and we couldn't believe it. You couldn't process it. It was so big. So even then, at the height of that, you know, you think about these things, and you know how you know, these disasters. And I thought it was sort of an irony of ironies that, you know, after living with this historic disaster for so long and working on it, becoming so involved with the Titanic, like to this day, I can get to the gym, you know, and,
right,
and all those amazingly strange devices like those little horses and things. But you know, it's just, and then to actually see something on you know, even greater than that, you know, so many people died, but it was just sort of mind boggling that, you know, we always, and I'm waiting. I think we're still too close to 9/11 for somebody to turn that into art or a game or something. Somebody will one day.
Yeah, there's some small like one person projects that have done it, but well, we need some time. Just
I think, and I think that was the same with the Titanic. It was largely forgotten with World War I, and then it seemed like something your grandparents might have remembered, and then, you know, again, as the survivors began to die, I think people began to realize this was sort of a seminal historic moment, certainly in seafaring. But there's so much about it, I think, is so interesting. So I'm really excited to hear about your project.
Well, listen, if you want to, if you have time to do this again sometime, we can have a little discussion like this, the three of us, and I can have Adventure Out of Time on screen, and we can walk around the ship, and you can tell
Sure,
us.
I'll probably remember lots of things about
Yeah,
that.
that'd be great. And
So
we'll
yeah, I'm gonna be. It's a busy summer for me. I'm gonna
Sure.
be. I'm actually gonna be in Southern California in the Coachella Valley. So
Oh, great.
July and
Yeah,
September.
I mean,
So
no
maybe we can
worries
do-
if things are busy. We're actually crazy busy over here because it's April, so it's Titanic month. So if this doesn't happen for a couple months, no worries, but
No
we'll
worries.
definitely do
We'll be
it.
in
And
touch.
yeah, as we wrap up, I do want to say one last thing in regards to the whole Titanic inspiring thing. You know, my life now, I do this. I creative direct these Titanic projects just for fun. I don't get paid for it. But my job now, as of a month ago, I work for RMS Titanic Incorporated. They're the exhibition, you know, the artifact people. So Titanic is my full-time job now. It's my life, and it has been my life for 25 years. I've always been the Titanic guy, and with my friends, and everybody knows me as, I'm a nut about Titanic, and my entire life has been Titanic. Every day of my life, I've read a book about Titanic, and it all goes back to Easter of 1998 when my mom gave me my copy of Adventure Out of Time. That game that you made absolutely changed my life and gave me a purpose and a passion. And I truly just want to take an opportunity to thank you. And I'm sure I speak for a lot of the people watching this, a lot of our fans who feel similarly. And we hope that if our project, if Honor and Glory or Project 401, if either of our projects is 100th as inspiring as Adventure Out of Time was for us, it would be a dream come true. So thank you for everything you did for this project, and thanks for joining us for this little conversation.
Well, thank you. That's a wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. Makes me feel great today.
Good.
I am sure Honor and Glory will find its place because there's a 6-year-old kid or a 7-year-old kid is waiting for it right now.
I hope so. Well, thank you. All right. Well,
Okay.
Phil, thanks for setting this up, and thanks for joining us.
No, you're welcome.
Thank you for setting it up. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, and we'll all talk soon. We'll explore Adventure Out of Time next time. All right.
Sounds good.
All right. Thanks for watching, everybody at home.
Thank you very much.
We'll talk soon.
Catch us all.
Bye.
Okay. Thanks.